Hey everybody, it's Angel from Halo Inspirations. We give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. Happy hump day to each of you. Happy Wednesday. Today's video is on half square triangles. Half square triangles, a lot of people are just, they don't like them. Or they have a lot of wonkiness going on and they struggle. It typically is one of, after you as a beginner have learned to sew rectangles and squares together, it typically is one of the very next types of blocks that you'll learn. And that wonkiness, it's a reality because we deal with some bias. And I'll show you when we get closer here what I mean by that. And some of the methods I'm going to show you can help with that. And yeah, so we're going to get this started. I will tell you that with wonkiness, it's usually one of three things. If your blocks aren't coming out, okay, to the size that you're wanting, it's either your cutting method, your sewing method, okay, whether it's a 1/4 inch seam or a straight line or not pulling or pushing and tugging, or it's related to pressing, and all three of those things can affect your 1/4 inch seams. I'm sorry, your half square triangles. So what kind of things am I going to be using today? Of course, I'm going to have a self-healing mat. I'm going to use a rotary cutter. I am going to have a marking tool, and believe it or not, I'm going to use duct tape or painter's tape, and then you'll need a ruler, okay? So those are the things that you're going to need. I'm going to pull you in and we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so I brought you in close to my cutting board here, and this is our beautiful half square triangle. Usually you'll see it with a dark print and or a dark color and a light color, but something contrasting. Sometimes there'll be prints in there, but I've made it a little easier for everybody to see by using two very different colors. And I'm saying this is my dark side, okay? And they actually do have a right and wrong side, so you'll be able to see that too. The first method I'm going to show you and talk about, let's say you wanted to make one of these in a 3-inch finish. So when it's in your quilt, it will measure at 3 inches. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take that 3 inches and you're going to want to add 7/8, okay? So we will cut these blocks at 3 7/8 to get a finished inside the quilt of 3 inches. So these are both cut at 3 7/8. I am going to place them right sides together. And then the next thing we're going to do, I'm going to make sure they're lined up nice and pretty. Okay. I know you can't see that, but put it back down here. Okay, so the next thing you're going to want to do after you put your right sides together, go ahead and turn it in the way that you're going to be able to cut it. Then you want to take your ruler, okay? Man, they just don't want to line up today, do they? And you want to line this up from corner to corner. Now, what's important is that you don't put the ruler on the corner. You want it slightly next to it because when you use your rotary blade, you want it to cut into the corner. Then you're just going to simply take your rotary blade and cut. Now I'm going to make sure it went all the way through, okay, before I pulled that off. And what you're going to get are 2 squares. And at this point, you're just going to take these to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch in from here. So one of the things I like to do, because I'm not very good at sewing a straight line, sometimes I will go ahead and I will mark this 1/4 inch, okay? I line up my ruler along that edge and I will mark it. But I have a seam guide open to me, so I'm actually just going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew right along this edge. Okay, so I've sewn a 1/4 inch from this inside. Now, I wanted to talk about that just a minute. I talked about some bias. When we cut along that angle, we cut on the bias, so you can actually see how stretchy that is. So when you're sewing, if you tug on that, you're going to distort the stitch. And you'll see over here, it's very, you know, it doesn't stretch. It's pretty locked. This way has a little bit, but it's still nothing at all like this. So can you imagine if you're sewing along and your needle is here and you're pulling, you can see that it's going to stretch it out, and then your block is going to be wonky. Now, and I've also messed with this like that. So if I go to sew this, I'm probably going to have a wonky block. Okay. So it's very important to protect that bias. So at this point, you're going to want to put your your dark side up, and then I simply fold it over. Now I don't want to distort at all, okay? So I'm going to do a little bit of a finger press. All right. I'm going to bring in my iron so that you can watch me press this, because you don't want to press that way. You want to literally push it down, because these are bias, okay? They're going to be really stretchy, and that heat can really mess with it. So you just want to be super careful. That's why I did the finger press first. But I'll bring my ironing board in here in just a second. Okay, so my iron's heated. I put this down, and I am either going to go simply like this, but I am going to hold it down to press, okay? Like this, just to press it. You got to be gentle, and you don't want to do this, because that will definitely distort your beautiful block. Okay. Now I'm going to show you a neat little trick. Okay, so here's our block. One thing I want to mention, and I might have picked mine up too fast, but when you press your blocks, cotton tends to have a memory of what it was before it was heated. So if you iron it and then pick it back up and manipulate it, it's going to go back to where it was before, okay? It's a good idea to go ahead and press and just let it cool. So here we are. Now what I was going to show you, I absolutely love this. Here's that duct tape, or that painter's tape, okay? And what I've done is I've taken a couple of strips of painter's tape. I put one down, and then I put the other one on top of it to give it just a little bit of a lip. And it's important, when I cut fabric, I cut where it's on the line. So my painter's tape is actually next to, I don't know if you'll be able to pick that up, but it's next to that black line, right next to it. So when I'm lining up on my fabric's on the line, not off the line, okay? So at this point, we need to trim it, okay? And remember, we wanted a 3-inch finished inside the quilt. That means before it's in there, we need to allow for seam allowance. So you're going to want to trim this to 3.5 inches, okay? So you very simply lay down your ruler. Now, if you don't have painter's tape, that's fine. But I'm going to let it hit. Might help if I did it in a way I can cut, right? I want it to hit that line. And it stops for me because of the paint. All right, and then I'm going to simply move this down a little till this is on the 3.5. And I got to tell you, I did pretty darn good. You can actually see that I'm at that 3.5-inch line. I line that up. Everything looks good. I'm going to go ahead and take my rotary cutter at this point and trim off anything that is extra, okay? Go ahead and pull that off. I did also flip over my cutting mat because I thought it would be better for you if in fact, got to think about how I'm going to do this, if in fact the lines were confusing to you. Okay, so I'm going to do it again. This time I'm lining up this end. Of course, it hit the lip, There we go. It hit that lip and it stops. And then you can move it back and forth, okay? So I'm going to line that up with that 3.5 inch mark. Now I'm actually going to turn this so I can cut away from me. Okay. Making sure I didn't move it. There we go. I'm going to take my rotary cutter, cut anything extra. I'm going to come over here. Whoop, I moved it. That's okay. Put it back. Keeps wanting to slide with it, huh? Yep, it sure does. Let's get this lined up correctly. There we go. And then I'm just going to do one more cut. Whoop, I missed one. I'll do it again. Not a big deal. Just lining it up on that 3.5 inch mark. There we go. Whoop. There we go. And then just give it a cut. And I can even see over here, it says 3, but that's because I started with 6. And if I counted, that's a half. That would be 1, 2, 3 and a half. So this is a perfect 3.5 inch square. And look, I had scrimplings that I had to cut. Okay, so that's one method. Now, that's not my preferred method because there's a lot going on when you cut that in half, and I worry about that bias. So the next method is very similar. Move this out of the way. Okay, it's very similar, but what we do instead is this time I want a 4-inch finish block. So I cut these squares in 4 7/8. So I added the 7/8. And then what you want to do is take your ruler and that 1/4 inch line, you want it to be on the points. And then you would simply take your preferred marking tool and you would draw a line. Okay? Then you flip it around and we do it again to the other side. Line up those, line up that 1/4 inch mark on that line, on that point. Okay? So I have it on this end, right on that 1/4 inch, and I have it right on the 1/4 inch of that point. And then again, I would simply take my marking tool and mark it. So then you'll have 2 marks. You take it to the sewing machine and you sew along that mark and you sew along this mark. Okay? And again, don't push or pull, just allow it to sew. Okay? And try to get that straight line with it. Then what I do is I come in here. Well, let's get that 1/4 inch lined up. After I got them sewn together, I put my 1/4 inch on one of the seams that I just sewn. Take my rotary cutter, and I'm going to cut it in half. Now at this point, you could even do it with a pair of scissors because you don't need to be exact, but you want about a 1/4 inch on each side. And then again, take it the dark side on top, flip it. I do a little easy jeezy, just simple. Just don't stretch that fabric because that's where the bias is. Okay? Take it to the pressing board. Once it's pressed, I'm going to let it cool for just a second. Okay, so once it's pressed and cooled, then again, you just want to take your ruler that if you did the tape, but if not, just line up along the 45-degree angle. Whoop, you want to go the other way. This time, I want a 4-inch finished block, so this time, I want to line it up on the 4.5. Okay, so down here I've got it on the 4.5, and I'm going to hold it down, cut, cut. Okay, now I need to do down here. So I'm going to, again, it was here, I'm just going to slide it on up, get it lined up on the 4.5. Looks good here too. And this time I'm just going to cut right along there. And that's all I had to cut, guys. Whoop whoop. So now I have a 4.5 inch finished half square triangle, or HST as we like to call them, ready to go. Not a lot of trimming going on there with the 7/8. Now, if you're new, instead of cutting your fabric 4 7/8 to get a 4-inch finished in the quilt, you can go to 1 inch. Makes the math easier, especially if you're talking about you want to be at a 4.5 inch finished, because you'd have to add 7/8 to 4.5. Now, you could really, honestly, you could go to the 4.5 here, and you could count 7/8. So you could go, you want 4.5 is what you want finished. So you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, that can't be right. Oh, that would be not 8. We want to add 7. Sorry, we want to add 7/8. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we would cut it at 5 7/8 to get a 4.5 inch finished block. Okay. But like I said, for a lot of new people or beginners, instead of using 7/8, you can go ahead and use 1 inch because it's easy math. Just know you're going to have more to trim and there's more waste. Okay. The last method is my least favorite, and I'll tell you why. This is the 3 inch that will be finished, and it's 3.5 right now. Okay. And inside here is where the bias is. It's super stretchy. On the outside, it is not the bias, okay? They are really tight, right? The bias is in the middle. I don't want to stretch it too much because I'll ruin it. I mean, I can already see that it's starting to distort. Okay, this last method is just a little bit different. I wouldn't do this method unless you actually had it written in the pattern to follow for the math. Some crazy things happen. Now I've cut 5.5 inch squares, and I think we'll find out at the end. I think it's going to yield 4 3.5 unfinished half square triangles, or 4 3-inch half square triangles finished. We'll see at the end. But I want to say, as you, this is a 5.5 inch square, but as you cut the square bigger, it doesn't work exactly the same. The numbers change. As you cut these smaller, again, it doesn't work exactly the same. There's not like the 7/8 to everything on the last two methods. There's just not a 2-inch method or a 3-inch method. Everything changes as the squares that you cut get bigger or smaller. But we'll see if 5.5 does a 3.5. But what, and you know, if it does, then at least then you have that much. But I would not do this, but a lot of people like it because it gives you 4 half square triangles, so it's kind of neat. However, you have a couple of choices with this. Now I've cut 2 5.5 inch squares, and I did put them right sides together. Okay, you can take your ruler and you can sew a half inch all the way around. Not so, excuse me, you could take a marker and you could mark along that 1/2 inch all the way around every side. Or, like I have my seam guide set up, and it's set up for a scant, so I'm really hoping that I don't have too much to trim because I haven't tested this fabric to make sure that I need a scant or a 1/4 inch. But I have the guide set up. So I'm going to take you to my sewing machine. I'm going to show you how I sew the edges, and then we'll take it from there. So here we are at the sewing machine. I'm going to go ahead, lower my needle, hang on to my top thread, And I'm simply just going to guide this in. Now remember, this guide is set up for a scant 1/4 inch. And when I get to the end here, I'm simply going to cut threads. Turn my fabric. I am going to go ahead and pull out this thread because my machine cuts funny. There we go. Set it up again. Lower my needle. Go ahead and sew the second line. Now, if you would have drawn your lines, you wouldn't have to cut threads. I did not draw my lines. So, if you did though, you could simply, when you got to the corner, you could lift your presser foot and turn the fabric. Just like so, okay? But I didn't do that. So I'm just going to go to the end, cut threads. I got 2 more edges. Drop the needle, just start sewing. One more edge to sew. Now remember, no matter what method you use to get your 1/4 inch seam, you want to make sure not to push the fabric through. All you're doing is guiding. That's all I'm doing, is guiding the fabric. Once we get down to the end here, I'm going to cut threads for the last time, and I'll pull you in closer with my ironing. They're all sewn. Okay, coming in a little closer here. I got a lot of quilting bling. Sometimes when you use this method, you'll get some puckers. So what I like to do before I actually cut is to give this a tiny bit of a press. And it just makes it much more flatter. And it gets rid of some of those puckers if I had any. And I went ahead and just used my pressing board instead of with the pack-a-mat, because the pack-a-mat adds a lot of heat. And remember, you still want to let this cool. So I'm going to let this cool a bit, and then I'll be right back with it on my cutting mat. Okay, so now it's nice and cool. Now the magic begins. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to line up your ruler so that you can cut these corners, okay? But you remember, don't put it on the corner, put it right next to the corner so you can get your rotary blade in there and cut. Turn your square for yourself. Line it up again right on those corners so that you can get your blade in there to hit that point of that corner. So don't cover the corner. Hold her down and give it a cut. Okay, so now we have cut both diagonals. Move this over just a little and look what happens. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Glad I got it all the way through there. Now we have 4 triangles. Again, you're going to take the dark side up, flip it open, and give it a really nice press with your fingers. Don't try not to distort anything, but then you're going to take this to your ironing board, and you'll have 4 of these now. That's the convenience behind this method. You will have 4. Now, instead of you waiting on me to iron, I'm going to go ahead and trim this up. Hopefully we got 3.5 inches, remember? Let's see what happened. And we did. Okay. So again, if you don't have this tape on the ruler, you will line it up along that 45-degree angle. Slide it up against that angle in the triangle. And then you want to line up on the 3.5 on this side. And this is actually 3.5. Remember, this is a 1/2 inch. That's 1, 2, 3.5. Take your rotary cutter and then simply trim. Then we're going to go to the other side. I'm just simply going to slide it down. Now you're seeing the extra that I cut off already. So I'm actually going to lift this up a second because I want to pull all this little bitties away so it looks nicer. And I can tell where that 3.5 inch mark is. I still have some left over here. But we're going to line this up. I'm actually going to turn this mat a little bit. And I'm going to cut the outside of this. Whoops. Pull it on back. Look, guys, that's all we cut off. Isn't that great? Not much waste there. There we go. So a 5.5 inch square will deliver 4 3.5 unfinished half square triangles. Before I end this video and go to the end of the video for a recap, I wanted to show you why this is not my favorite method. Yes, it's convenient, so that is a pro. You get 4 triangles. However, the math gets tricky. It's not as simple as taking 5.5 to 3.5 unfinished is 2 inches, right? When you go up, everything changes. When you go down, things change. And there is an algebraic method to, or math to it, but I would encourage you, if you use this method and it's not a 5.5 inch square or a 3.5 inch unfinished triangles that you need, to wait for the pattern to tell you, okay? But the other negative, remember on the last one, we talked about the bias was in the middle. The bias is not in the middle, okay? The bias is actually on the outside, okay? There's lots of stretch, and you can already see I'm distorting this square, so now that can't be used. But that's where the bias is. So when you go to add these to other squares or other blocks, you're going to have to be very careful when you sew not to pull or push and distort this edge, okay? That's really, really important. I mean, look at that. It's getting crazy. And the reason is, okay, when we cut these 4, we cut along here. And we sewed along the outside where it's not a bias, so the bias is now being exposed. Where the other one, we sewed on either side of the angle, cut down the middle, so the sewing line was along that bias. So that's the difference, and this is why I mean, you can even look at that. You can, well, maybe, yeah, you can actually see how this is starting to distort. That bias is really essential to some of the wonky. So I wanted to bring you in. I wanted to show that before I panned out one last time. Okay, so there is the end of the tutorial here on how to do half square triangles. Now I've given you 3 methods, but there's actually more out there. And I'll do another video later on some of those methods. But both the first and the second method, just on a recap of math, we added 7/8 to the finished block. So in the first method, we wanted 3 inches. We added 7/8 and cut 2 3 and 7/8 blocks. On the second method, we wanted 4-inch finished. So we added 7/8 and was able cut 2 4 and 7/8 inch blocks. Boy, that's a tongue twister. The second method is my favorite because the bias is, once you're done with the half square triangle, the bias is in the middle, and the outside, you don't have to worry about as much getting something wonky going on, okay? So that is my preferred method. The last method, there's no direct math. So we took 5.5 inch squares that we cut, put them right sides together, sewed a 1/4 inch all the way around, cut along the diagonals, and we got 4, after trimming and sewing, we got 4 3.5 inch unfinished blocks or half square triangles. However, if you cut a 6.5 inch block, you're not going to get 4.5. If you cut a 4.5 inch finished or blocks to cut up and sew together, you're not going to end up with a 2.5 inch half square triangle unfinished. So it's real important to understand that there's not a direct line of a number just to add. It's got a little bit of algebra going in. So I would tell you, unless you need 3.5 inch half square triangles, if it's in the pattern, the math is done for you. But I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, don't hesitate to drop them down below. To be honest, I'd love to hear what your preferred method is, because especially if it's different, even if it's the same, and maybe you tell me why it is your preferred method, because we each have a method in quilting that makes sense to us, right? So I'd love to hear about it. Drop those in the comments, drop questions in there. But I'll also be on Facebook Live today at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on my business page, which the link is in the description. I hope you come out. I'd love to hear what your preferred method is, or if you have any questions, I'll be there live to answer them for you. Either way works great. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe. Sharing is awesome because then other people who may need some ideas on how to get these done will actually have that information available to them. So that would be really awesome too. But that is it. So I will see you all either today at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or I'll see you next week. And until then, may you continue to be inspired, productive, and joyful, and never stop making your dreams in quilting come true. I love y'all. I'll see y'all soon. Happy quilting.